cold out here today. Welcome to another piano book. Oh, delicious. If you stick around to the end, there's some important kind of piano book news stroke information, which I'd really appreciate if you watch. But first, let's just head back to the shed. One of the greatest honours of this Spitfire Odyssey has been to meet hundreds of like-minded composers and to make some wonderful new friends, not least with a composer who is prolific but works kind of outside my oeuvre, outside TV, film, games. He's also possibly one of the nicest people I've ever met, but incredibly talented. And his name is Gary Barlow. Very honoured to refer to Gary as a friend or as a mate. But he does cost me a lot of money because we both share, and I imagine the feeling's mutual, we both share a passion for tech. And he contacted me recently to talk about my mic setup for the piano, and having worked with some of the true greats in the engineering space, suggested that I continue using the M149s, but maybe add some bits. So I obediently bought one of these from Sontronics, an Apollo 2, which is a stereo mic. Obedient as always, Gary. A second mic that I need to get, which is an absolute monster of a microphone. I've managed to get it on loan because it's really expensive, but unfortunately it didn't arrive in time, so I haven't been able to. I was basically planning to do my final kind of the definitive winter piano with this amazing setup, but it didn't arrive, so I'll be doing that the week after next because I'm in the States next week. So what to do this week? Or is that something?
Yeah, it's kind of come out of bluegrass. They do a lot of it there, fiddle stuff, and people refer to it as chopping. So if you YouTube any kind of chopping, you should see. So it's using this movement
It's super cool.
and it's really good for you know, accompanying fiddle tunes.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
really,
Yeah. No, I can't see this like that.
yeah.
I mean, who knew? The amazing Alice Allen, a musician who I met who works up here in Scotland. Details linked below. Now, I employed her on this TV series Home, and I thought it'd be nice to take you through the samples that I made with Alice, and I thought I could show you this and maybe some of Inside Number 9, not this season, but previous ones. But when looking in my projects folder within EXS, I realised that I've basically done a sample library for pretty much, I'd say, 50% of the jobs that I've done, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of my career. So I thought it would be fun to take myself and you with me down memory lane to look at some of these bespoke little mini libraries that I've made for myself. Now, thinking about the very first job I did, as I used to have a writing partner and we parted ways, and so the first job I did after splitting up with him was a thing called 2 Pints of Lager and a Packet of Crisps, which actually became quite a successful TV show in the UK. That's the only one. I did make loads of samples for that, but that's the only one that's still on the E4 XT hardware sampler that I used to use. So I'd say the first kind of major thing that I did using the EXS was Top Gear, and that is still playing on Top Gear to this day. Now, I didn't write the music for Top Gear. That was written by the Allman Brothers. It's a track called Jessica, but they wanted to bring it up to date, and they wanted it to be less of a kind of boys show and more of a family show. So they had this idea of filming lots of people of all ages and backgrounds driving, with the Top Gear theme, Jessica, playing according to their kind of profiles. So there was a guy who was driving a tractor and we were going to do country and western. There was an old couple who were driving a kind of an old Austin and we were going to do like a string quartet for them. And there was a yuppie speaking on a mobile phone. So I sampled a Nokia phone. Yes, they used to sound like that. All I did is I actually made, I think, about 8 Top Gear themes and then just hard cut in Pro Tools between them. And the very end one was really kind of boisterous with some BT breaks from the new school or stuff like that. And I said to the series producer, yeah, but it is still a boys' program, isn't it? Because it was like really like hyper stabby and all of this kind of stuff. And he looked at me and went, Yes, it is still a boys' show, isn't it? And the next day he rang back and asked me to basically create the Top Gear theme just with that one hyper style. So we dropped the Nokia phone and the string quartet and featured the sequoia. This actually isn't a sequoia, this is a ringtone, but it's made by Zvex, same company, and it looks very much like this. It's basically a stepped. You can control the speed with this knob, and then you've got this stepped EQ boosts, so you can change the profile per step. I think I was paid about 600 quid for it, but I think the Allman Brothers are doing very well out of it. Requiem was the first feature film I did, and it was an art house movie, and I think I had a budget of about £5.50 on it. So I called in family and friends, and you'll see that that's a bit of a theme coming up. This is basically my brother Keaton Henson before his voice broke, and his friend, I believe his name was Johnny Sprunt, tiny little creatures, and I got them in to sing scarily and made this choir patch. I've always tried to convince him to write a song with this as an accompaniment, because basically it would mean his 10-year-old self would be accompanying his, I think he's 30 now, 30-year-old self on a track that he wrote this year, which is, in my mind, time travel, the romance of sampling. Kodak. Now, this is I can't remember what I sampled on this. This was a pitch for an advert that I didn't get. The advertising exec said to me, Christian, what are you using for the Kodak Menomic at the end? That Kodak has a kind of McDonald's-style Menomic. I said, oh, it's a Moog, which is a vintage synth. And he went, well, Christian, classic advertising, creative chat this. How about you get the drum kit to play the Menomic? And I said, right, well, it can play the rhythm of the Menomic, but not the tune, because... And he went, no, I don't want any rhythm, just tune on the drums. And so that was a tricky one. And about 2 years later, I had to do a seminar at another advertising agency talking about how not to brief composers. I started telling this story, and then I suddenly saw someone kind of go green at the end of the table. It was a big kind of boardroom we were in, and realised it was this guy, and I was basically telling a story about the guy that obviously had moved advertising agencies, and I kind of just tapered off in the middle of it. So what's here? Les Fils de Vaughn was a parkour film made in France, and what I do with the French movies and any movies that are not in English that I do is I just get a translator to come in and basically translate live, and I record it into Pro Tools, shift it back so it's more in sync, and it basically means I have a translation on kind of a fader somewhere. But again, features a brother of mine, Joe Henson, who's now famous for stuff like Assassin's Creed and Horizon Zero Dawn. And I remember this was on Christmas Eve, and he was just like, oh, man, do I have to come and do this? If you've not checked out Ketchak, it's a Balinese thing. I'll link below. It's like as mind-blowing as Alice Allen's Chops. It's basically like flamenco palmas, you know, the clapping thing, but done with the voice. In fact, I've actually sampled some here. So director liked it. I demoed it with the sampled stuff. So Joe and I had to redo it. Animal was an interesting film. Joe and I, my brother again, we sampled all sorts of kitchenware, and this is what inspired Glass and Steel. It's just, again, one of those things where you just don't know what's going to work and what's not. And in fact, it was a very boring looking aluminium bowl, and it just created this amazing. Severance is a hysterical film, horror comedy. This is something I went behind a fridge, and it had a compressor that made this noise. And I love making, tones, music concrete, if you will, out of an environment. So actually what happens is they go into this bunker, and this music just kind of comes out of the surrounding area. Quite intense. Now, it's a boy-girl thing, teenage thing, made this Peel guitar sample with a Telecaster and a Fender Champ amp. And that's now become the Spitfire Peel guitar, which we've only just realised is actually misspelt. It's like a peal of bell. A lot of people thought it was after this DJ that was famous in this country, but it's actually a peal of bells, and it should be P-E-A-L. I might do a little tutorial about how I use the Peel guitar, because there's various tricks that I adopt with it that are quite cool. But I also think I did some other bits. My favourite teen movie is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I love the end sequence, which is a track by Yellow, so I did an homage to that. Just me. Triangle, if you haven't seen that film, the last reel of that film is pretty incredible, pretty mind-blowing. The CGI lets it down, but really good movie made by Chris Smith. Yeah, there was a lot of hard cuts, and basically we went between actuality, footsteps running, to these kind of... It's nuts. That distortion is created by a thing called a culture vulture, which I want to do a special vlog about, because its saturation is very unique. It's like, it does like 100% saturation. Black Death, probably the score I'm most proud of, me doing a bit of an Arvo pet, and it's an amazing movie. Ridley Scott said it was his favourite British movie in that decade, which was pretty cool. The thing I really enjoyed doing was this kind of guitar quartet, which was some basses. I think it was all basses, actually. It was bass guitar quartet. So it's my brother, my assistant at the time was a guitarist, and there was another two people. I think, no, it was me, and then there was also this guy called Tom Howe, who's a fantastic composer, works out in America now. He did the Great British Bake Off, but he's also doing like mega kind of Hollywood stuff now. This was a Labs instrument, but it isn't anymore. But what I was thinking of doing is, once I get to the end of this vlog, is I'm just going to export these EXS instruments and put them as a kind of a best of my life in samples pack for you to download for free and use at your will. Just don't sell them as sample libraries. Secret of Moonacre, children's fantasy. I wrote that and used the vocal talents of Natasha Khan, Bat for Lashes. And this is where I made that sample of the felt piano. Always tell it when I hear it on other films. It's my fingernail on that D. It's a Yamaha, I believe. I called it a muted upright, and then I think when we released it, we called it felt piano because I didn't know what the Celeste pedal was called. That you can download is now called the Soft Piano by Spitfire. You can download that for free. Again, in the links below, that's part of the Labs thing. Poirot was my proudest job that I've ever done. Now, my brother Joe made these out of Shruti boxes, and these are what became the inspiration for Evo grids, or rather the inspiration for the thing that inspired Evo grids. I asked my brother, I just want drones that just are really, really super long, and I just want one and I'll spread it across the keyboard. I couldn't believe how effective it was to have a drone that was just really, really long. I think until that point, hard drive space had meant that you were stingy with the amount that you sampled before looping. And I just suddenly thought, well, the EXS will, you know, can be as long as you want. I think these drones are over a minute long and stuff. So that was the kind of precursor to me imagining the Evo. So I thought, well, what if I were to do the Poirot drones but with strings, and that was for a thing called Sinbad. So that came quite a few years later. I worked with my brother Joe and his partner Alexis on a thing called Zubo, which was originally called Podo. And this is an example of how you can pay string players for a sample session, but you can't really define what is a sample. Does it have to be a single note, or can it be a piece of music? So really, you can, within a sample session, record pieces of music that then you can kind of trigger through your sampler. So I think that this kind of represents the early days of my kind of, in my own head, developing the idea of creative sample libraries or character sample libraries, which Spitfire does a lot of now, which is not stuff that's trying just to be realistic of virtual instruments, something that restricts the versatility of the use but inspires. So I think that's one thing that's quite interesting about sampling. The more control you want, the less character you'll get. So it's finding that that interesting middle point between, I think that what I don't like is phrase libraries, because it just feels like I'm basically putting other people's music in my music. So what I enjoy is that middle point between ultimate control and the kind of phrase library thing. So this is very much the start of me developing that. Robot Overlords. And the thing I remember doing for this was I bought a small Celtic harp. I came up with the idea of very slow tremolandi, basically because I can't finger that quickly. Go between, I think I've said this story so often, but the first scene was this swaying kind of grass, very kind of, what's it called? Not straw, that's when you pick it up, just corn, stuff they farm. And they wanted to convey a sense of heat, and so I had the idea of going into the hall and hiring some mandolin players. So I took the slow tremolandi technique that I did with the harp and instructed, it was a mixture of charangos and mandolins, them to play slow, because basically with so many if they were playing too fast, it would just become a sheen. So this is the effect. The fast trems as well. And that inspired, it wasn't actually, we didn't use these samples, but that inspired the mandolin swarm that we made with Spitfire, which is linked below. Absolutely awesome. And whilst I'm on the subject of little contact instruments that I've made, Alien Isolation. This was nuts because it was the biggest commission that my brother, myself, and Alexis had ever received. And we convinced them within 2 weeks of commissioning us to basically blow half of the music budget on just massive sample sessions. So everything that we played was going to be bespoke. And again, it wasn't going to be, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of VI. It was going to be character samples. There's a lot of aleatoric stuff I seem to recall as well. I think this is the richest I've ever felt as a composer using these samples. I mean, it just was such a huge budget, and knowing that I'm one of 3 people who had them, it's kind of a shame in a way that there's no way of those being reused. It seems kind of wasteful to me because there's so much you can do with them. But it was again a great experience. Over the years, with Inside Number 9, now in season 5, if you haven't checked out Inside Number 9, you've just got to do it, man. It's just some of the best telly you're ever likely to see. It's kind of a cross between Twilight Zone and Tales of the Unexpected, which that's a kind of a generational reference. This is 12 Days. I can't remember the full title of that, but it's just that's the best bit of telly I've ever worked on. Yeah, I'm not going to play too much of that because I've actually done something with that which I think is really exciting and is probably going to be in a future library. And again, you can see how I'm developing ideas for sample libraries through my little experiments. This Super Tasto idea, Super Sol Tasto, I directed them to play just on the very edge of where they actually lose the tone, where they go too far up the neck. The Trial of Elizabeth Gadge, I remember that. They wanted me to do a kind of Mika Levi type score. Now, some of these Inside Number 9 ones are paid for by the BBC, and some of them I just paid for out of my own pocket. So the thing you have to be careful doing when you do sample your own kind of personal sample libraries is you have to be aware that if someone else is paying for them, they own the copyright. So you have to be careful in what you use them on. That's why I mean the Alien samples is a shame. It can't be released as a sample library or shared with friends. I can't use it on other stuff either. I could theoretically use it and hope that no one spots it, but I would be in breach of copyright, which is not a practice that I like to undertake. You just have to be aware of what you've paid for. If it's a soloist, I will always pay them really favourably because it very much is an embodiment of their character that you're kind of exploiting to a certain degree. So it's good that you just kind of pay them fairly. It's a bit of a minefield, but you have to be careful about ownership of these things. If you want to make a sample library that you can think, well, I can use that forever, then it's better if you pay for it, not the production. or indeed the games maker or whoever. Which brings us kind of pretty much up to date. It's a grab bag of stuff that I've been working on over the many years. So I guess the Top Gear thing would have been, how many years ago now? Maybe nearly 20 years ago. So really early days of like when Logic wasn't even owned by Apple, that kind of stuff. Brings us up to date to Home, and I used the talents of Alice Allen. We did an interesting thing where I wrote out cells and in a certain key, and she interpreted it, and it was at a tempo and in a style that's kind of aleatoric. And it's interesting to create something that's characterful that you can respond to as a composer, I guess. So it's almost like I'm collaborating with Alice after she's played. Again, it's that time travel thing. So if I play this in B major, kind of interesting. Be interested to see what you think. Again, that's the main theme. You know, I got her to play individually, different speeds, different pitches, and then loaded it into a sampler instrument so I could then incorporate it into completely different cues with different inversions, and I could chop up the theme so it could, could create inversions and inverse versions of it and that kind of stuff. And that's ostensibly how I approach a lot of these multi-episodic TV series. You have to pay the musicians a multi-episodic fee if you just record them for one session and you want to use them across many episodes. It can be really problematic and very costly. So for me, I'd rather get a grab bag of phraselets, thematic things, maybe ostinati, single notes, build up a sound world, and then use that if you're working on these low budget kind of British style TV shows. It's the way that I go. Anyway, so that's just a little journey through my career in samples. And as I say, linked below will be a grab bag of these samples for you to try yourself, and do give me feedback on how you find them. So news on Piano Book that I promised you earlier. It's been a crazy few weeks for me because I've been working on Inside Number 9, but I also have to admit the enthusiasm, which I thank you for, that has been met with this project has meant that I've become totally overwhelmed with emails and libraries. And what I'm really paranoid about is using libraries that I'm not allowed to use because they might be a mate of yours samples that you're letting me try out, or we have to be very careful about digital pianos, this, that, and the other. So apologies to those of you who've emailed me directly. Could you possibly just do one more step? And that is to go to this page, which is a submissions form. The instructions are all there. I would really like your opinion on whether you feel a forum would be useful. It's quite a big undertaking, and if we go for it, then it's something that I will reach out to you people for help moderating. I hear it's quite a time-consuming thing. I guess it'll have an organic growth and it won't be busy from the get-go. The problem we have at the moment is emails coming in and comments coming in to links of collaborations. And the whole point of this massive collaborative project. There's no kind of central place for people to discuss and exchange ideas without it coming through me as a conduit. So I think that that's the main purpose really of the forum, is not kind of necessarily people to have massive conversations. It would be great if they did, but it's mainly to share different ideas, so it's not coming through me and relying on me, particularly when I have these busy periods. I kind of go off radar, and I can imagine it's frustrating the effort that you put in to sample these things. So there's a poll. If it doesn't appear, by the way, this is because you're probably watching this embedded on another site. If you're on YouTube, this poll will appear, and that is, do you think it's worthwhile for us to set up a forum for Piano Book and take the emphasis off the comments in YouTube? Yes or no? Piano Day is the 29th of March, and that's the day that I want to really kind of launch a lot of these contributions from you all. So that'll be a day to look out for in the Piano Book calendar. So next week, hopefully be getting this amazing mic setup up. So there's a little question to you, fun one. I'd love for you to guess which is the mother of all mics that Gary Barlow has recommended we try out. Thanks as always for watching, and if you haven't subscribed yet, well, Piano Day is coming up and there's going to be lots of amazing pianos to learn about, download for free. If you want want to be notified the next time I put up a video, ding that bell, and one of those, if you've liked this video, would be appreciated. See you next time.